There's a memory I've carried my entire life, crystal clear, undeniable, the kind of memory that feels more real than what happened yesterday. Everyone from my hometown has it too. We all lived through the same event. We all remember it vividly. Except when we talk about it, nothing matches. Not the small details, not the perspectives, the entire structure of what happened. And the strangest part? None of us feel uncertain. We all know exactly what we saw. We just can't agree on what that was. This is the story of the night something happened in my town. Something we all experienced. Something none of us can properly remember. And the more we tried to piece it together, the more we realised maybe we weren't supposed to. Maybe the fact that we couldn't remember it correctly was the entire point. Maybe memory itself became the experiment, and we were all unknowing participants in something far larger than a single night in a small town could ever contain. What you're about to hear isn't a simple story of strange lights or unexplained sounds. This is about the nature of consciousness itself, about the protective barriers our minds construct when faced with information that shouldn't exist, and about what happens when an entire community shares an experience that none of them can actually share accurately. This is about the moment we all realize that memory isn't a recording device, it's a translation service. And sometimes, what it translates is designed to keep us sane, rather than keep us informed. Chapter 1. A small, shared town. I grew up in a place where everyone knew everyone. The kind of town where your business was everyone's business, where gossip travelled faster than wildfire, and where shared history was the glue holding the community together. We had 2 traffic lights, 1 grocery store, and a school that served kindergarten through 12th grade under one sagging roof. The population hovered around 800 people, give or take whoever had recently been born or moved away or passed on. The kind of number where you could genuinely know every single person by name if you tried. Nothing ever happened there. That was the point. That was what people loved about it. Safety, predictability, the same faces at the same places doing the same things year after year. When something did happen, a car accident, a store closing, someone moving away, it became the story everyone told, endlessly. The narrative was communal property. Details were negotiated, agreed upon, and locked into place through repetition. The Henderson's barn fire became legendary not because of the fire itself, but because of how the telling evolved. Initially, it was just a barn fire. Within weeks, it was a cautionary tale about proper electrical maintenance. By the end of the year, it had transformed into a story about community resilience, about how everyone came together, about the meals that appeared on their doorstep for months afterward. The facts remained stable, but the meaning grew richer with each retelling until the story belonged to everyone, not just the Hendersons. That's how memory worked in our town. Collective, stable, mutually reinforced. If someone misremembered a detail, 3 other people would correct them. Stories didn't drift because they were constantly being re-anchored through conversation. Memory was social glue, and accuracy was how the glue stayed strong. That's why what I'm about to tell you is so deeply strange. Because in a town where every story gets told 1,000 times until it crystallizes into truth, we had one story that never solidified, one event that everyone experienced but no one could define. And unlike other memories that fade or blur, this one stayed sharp. It just stayed sharp in completely different directions. The town itself was unremarkable, located in the Midwest, far enough from anything significant that we never got caught up in larger events. We weren't on the way to anywhere. We were a destination only if you lived there or were visiting someone who did. The landscape was flat farmland punctuated by small clusters of trees. The sky dominated everything, stretching in all directions without mountains or buildings to interrupt it. On clear nights, you could see every star. The absence of light pollution made the heavens feel close, almost oppressive in their vastness. I didn't realize how strange this was until much later. As a kid, I accepted it. Memory was memory. Adults talked about things differently all the time, but when I came back for a reunion years later, When we all sat around trying to remember that night, I finally understood. We weren't remembering differently. We were remembering something that couldn't be remembered correctly. And the fact that we'd all lived in a place where collective memory was sacred made the fracturing of this one memory even more impossible to ignore. The town had a rhythm. Friday night football games in the fall, church on Sundays, the 4th of July parade that was more tractors than floats. The rhythm was comforting. It created structure. It created expectation. When something disrupted that rhythm, everyone noticed. Everyone talked about it. Everyone processed it together until it fit back into the pattern. Except for that one night. That one event. It never fit back into the pattern. It existed outside the rhythm, outside the collective processing, outside the normal mechanism by which our community made sense of things. And somehow, without anyone deciding it should be this way, we all just accepted that. We moved on. We let the rhythm resume. We continued being the town where nothing happened and everyone knew everyone. But underneath that rhythm, underneath that return to normalcy, something had changed. Something fundamental. We all carried it. We all knew others carried it. We just couldn't talk about it because talking required agreement, and agreement was impossible. Chapter 2. The First Disagreement. The reunion happened at the old community centre, the same building where we'd had school dances and town meetings and holiday gatherings. 20 years had passed since graduation, and faces had changed, but voices were the same. So were the stories. We laughed about teachers, about pranks, about the small dramas that felt enormous at the time. Jennifer's failed attempt to dye her hair purple before prom. The time Michael accidentally set off the fire alarm during chemistry class. The blizzard that cancelled school for a week and left us all bored out of our minds. The stories flowed easily because they were well worn. We'd told them before. We'd agreed on them before. They were part of our shared mythology, the collective narrative of growing up together in a place where everyone knew your name and your business and your parents and your history. These stories were safe. These stories were home. Then Marcus brought it up. "Remember when they evacuated the school that one night?" he said, grinning like it was a funny memory. "When we all had to go to the gym and wait?" The table went quiet, not uncomfortable, just attentive. Everyone remembered. You could see it in their faces, the shift in expression, the slight change in posture, recognition. But not the comfortable recognition of our other shared stories. Something else, something that made the air feel heavier. "That wasn't the school," Eleanor said slowly. "It was the church. We all met at the church." Marcus frowned. "No, definitely the school gym. I remember the bleachers. I remember sitting on those cold metal bleachers for what felt like hours." "It was October," someone else added. "Cold. We were all freezing. I remember my mum making me wear my heavy jacket and being annoyed about it." "It was summer," I said, surprising myself, but I was sure. I remembered heat, humidity, the smell of cut grass, the way my shirt stuck to my back, the feeling of wanting to be anywhere else but trapped in a building during what should have been beautiful summer evening. "You're all wrong," said Robert, who'd been our class president and always spoke with absolute certainty. It was spring, late April, early May. I remember because it was right before prom, and everyone was stressed about missing practice. We had a whole thing about whether it would affect the dance schedule. We went around the table, 9 people, 9 completely different time frames. Some remembered winter, some remembered fall. I was locked into summer, and I could feel the thick air, could remember sweat on the back of my neck, could recall the specific quality of light that comes just before sunset on a long summer day. But so could they. They felt their versions just as strongly. "Okay, but what actually happened?" Elena asked. "Why did they evacuate us?" Silence. Not the silence of forgetting. The silence of multiple people trying to access the same information and finding completely different answers. "There was a smell," someone said finally. "Like burning. But not normal burning. Something chemical. Something wrong." "No," It was a sound, Marcus said firmly. A hum. Really low. Made your teeth vibrate. I remember putting my hands over my ears, but it didn't help because it wasn't really sound. It was more like a feeling that sounded. It was lights, I said, and I remembered. Lights through the windows, bright but not blinding. Moving but not in any recognizable pattern. Not like car headlights or spotlights or anything mechanical. Organic movement, purposeful but not comprehensible. None of you are right, said Jennifer. It was silence. Complete silence. Like someone had hit mute on the entire world. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just this absence of sound that was louder than any noise could be. We stared at each other. Are we talking about the same thing? Elena asked. We all nodded. Absolutely. Unquestionably. Same event. Same night. Same fear. Same sense that something fundamental had shifted, but nothing else matched. Not one single detail aligned across our memories except this. Something happened. We were gathered somewhere, and afterward nothing was ever quite the same. How long did it last? Robert asked. More silence. More conflicting certainties. Hours, someone said. We were there until almost midnight. Minutes, said another. Maybe 20 minutes tops. All night, I said. We didn't leave until morning. The impossibilities were stacking up. We'd experienced the same event but retained completely incompatible versions. And unlike normal memory disagreements, where one person misremembers a detail and others correct them, we were all certain. No one felt confused or unsure. Each person's memory was vivid, detailed, complete. They just couldn't all be describing the same thing. Except they were. We knew they were. That certainty existed beneath all the contradictions. Maybe we should try to figure out what year it was, Elena suggested. That would at least narrow things down. But it didn't. Because when we started comparing the years we remembered, they spanned a 5-year period. Some people placed it in middle school, others in high school. One person was convinced it happened when we were in elementary school. The mathematics didn't work. We'd all been in the same graduating class. We'd all moved through school together. There was no 5-year window where we were all students simultaneously experiencing the same event at different ages. Yet that's what our memories insisted had happened. This is crazy, Marcus said, but he was smiling, still treating it as a curiosity rather than an impossibility. It is crazy, Elena agreed, but I know I'm right. I know what I remember. Everyone nodded, because everyone felt that way. Everyone was right. Everyone was certain, and everyone was describing something completely different. That night, after the reunion ended, and people headed back to hotels or childhood homes or wherever they were staying, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through my version of the memory. Summer evening, school building, bright lights through windows, the feeling of time stretching, adults speaking in hushed, urgent tones, being told everything was fine while knowing that nothing was fine, the lights moving in patterns that suggested intelligence but not human intelligence, and then nothing. The memory just stopped, like a film reel running out. One moment I was in that room watching those lights, and the next moment I was home in bed and it was morning and everything was normal again. But how did I get home? Who took me? What happened between watching the lights and waking up in bed? I didn't know. The information simply wasn't there, and I'd never questioned it before, never noticed the gap. The memory had felt complete until I tried to examine it closely. Now it felt like a painting with a section cut out, the frame intact, but a crucial piece missing. I pulled out my phone and texted the group we'd created. Does anyone remember leaving? Like, actually leaving? The responses came slowly, one by one, and they were all the same. No one remembered leaving. Everyone's memory ended the same way mine did. Mid-event, mid-experience, and then suddenly home, suddenly morning, suddenly over. The transition didn't exist. In a group of people with violently conflicting memories about nearly every detail, we all shared the same blank space. That should have been our first clue. but we didn't recognize it yet. We were still treating this as a curiosity, a strange quirk of collective memory. We didn't understand yet that we were starting to uncover something much larger than mismatched recollections. We were beginning to discover that memory itself had protected us from something we weren't supposed to fully remember. Chapter 3. The timeline doesn't line up. Over the next few days, we couldn't let it go. It became an obsession. We created a group chat, started comparing notes, tried to build a coherent timeline. It fell apart immediately. Those who remembered winter were certain it happened during a snowstorm. They described walking through snow to get to wherever we gathered, the cold biting their faces, the way their breath clouded in front of them. They remembered specific winter coats, boots, the sound of ice crunching underfoot. Jennifer remembered her mother scraping frost off the car windshield in the parking lot. Michael remembered slipping on ice and catching himself on a railing. These weren't vague impressions. They were specific, tactile memories with clear sensory details. Those who remembered summer were equally certain. They talked about cicadas, about wearing shorts and t-shirts, about how the air felt heavy and wrong in a way that had nothing to do with normal summer humidity. One person remembered their mother making lemonade beforehand, remembered the condensation on the glass, remembered the taste of it turning slightly warm in the heat. Another remembered fireflies in the parking lot, remembered trying to catch one before being called inside, remembered the brief glow between their cupped hands. I personally remembered it being a Friday, because I'd been looking forward to the weekend. I had plans. There was a movie I wanted to see, friends I was supposed to meet up with. The event had interrupted those plans, and I remembered feeling frustrated about it before the fear set in. But someone else remembered it being a Tuesday because they'd missed their piano lesson. They remembered their piano teacher calling their house the next day, concerned about the absence, and their mother making some excuse. Another person was sure it was a Saturday because they'd been at a birthday party earlier that day. They remembered presents, cake, playing in someone's backyard, and then later being pulled away from that normal childhood experience into something that wasn't normal at all. We tried to anchor it to external events. What grade were we in? What year was it? But even that fractured. Some people placed it in middle school, around 7th or 8th grade. Others were certain it happened in elementary school, maybe 4th or 5th grade. I would have sworn we were in 8th grade because I remembered being worried about high school starting soon. Remembered that specific anxiety that comes at the end of middle school. But Elena was absolutely certain we were in 5th grade because she remembered her 5th grade teacher, remembered the classroom, remembered specific details about that year of her life surrounding the event. The mathematics didn't work. We'd all been in school together continuously. We'd all been in the same classes at the same times. There was no year where some of us were in 5th grade and others in 8th. Yet we each carried these incompatible certainties. Robert started a spreadsheet. He listed all our names and asked everyone to provide specific details: date, season, location, duration, sensory details, what grade we were in, what we were wearing, who we saw there, what we were told. The spreadsheet quickly became a map of contradictions. Not a single column aligned across all entries. Every data point had multiple incompatible versions. Maybe it happened more than once, someone suggested. But that didn't feel right either. We all remembered it as one singular event. One night. One moment of strangeness that marked a before and after in our lives. Whatever happened, it happened once. We just couldn't agree on when, or where, or how, or what. Eleanor pointed out something interesting. Look at the duration, she said. We had estimates ranging from 15 minutes to an entire night. How can something feel like hours to one person and minutes to another? Time dilation, someone suggested. Maybe some kind of psychological effect. But that didn't explain the seasonal differences. That didn't explain why some people had physical memories of snow and others had physical memories of heat. Psychological time dilation doesn't change the weather. It doesn't rewrite which clothes were weather appropriate. It doesn't explain why Jennifer's mother was scraping frost in one version, while another person's mother was serving cold lemonade in another. I started researching false memory, confabulation, the Mandela effect. I read about how memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive, how we don't replay memories like video recordings but rebuild them each time using bits of genuine experience mixed with assumptions and context. I read about how entire groups can develop false shared memories through suggestion and social reinforcement, but none of it fit. False memories are usually vague. They lack sensory detail. They feel uncertain when examined closely. Our memories weren't like that. They were sharp. They were specific. They included details that couldn't have been suggested because we hadn't discussed them before. And each person's certainty remained absolute even when confronted with contradictions. Marcus found something interesting in his parents' photo albums. His mother was an obsessive photographer, documenting everything. He found photos from what he believed was around the time of the event. Family pictures, school pictures, random snapshots of daily life. And there was a gap. A period of about a week where no photos existed. Before the gap, photos were dated in his mother's handwriting on the back. After the gap, dates resumed. But that week, nothing. No photos, no documentation. Oh, just empty pages where there should have been images. Maybe she just forgot to take pictures, someone suggested. My mother, Marcus laughed. She once took pictures of me doing homework because she thought I looked thoughtful. She didn't miss days, let alone weeks. Others checked their own family albums. Not everyone found gaps. Some people's parents weren't regular photographers. But those who did find family photos from that era found similar anomalies. Missing periods. Unexplained gaps in otherwise comprehensive documentation. Or photos that existed but were weird. Jennifer found a picture of herself that her father had taken. She was standing in the backyard, clearly reacting to something above the camera frame. Her face was tilted up, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. But not scared. That was the strange part. She looked amazed, curious, almost delighted. The kind of expression a child gets when seeing something wonderful and impossible, like a magic trick they can't figure out. "I don't remember this being taken," Jennifer said. "I don't remember that moment at all." The photo was dated. The date matched one of the windows we'd identified as a possible time for the event. But the season was wrong for Jennifer's memory. She remembered winter. The photo showed her in a light jacket, leaves on the trees in the background. Fall, maybe early spring, not winter. "Maybe the date is wrong," she said. But her father was meticulous. He always dated photos. And the surrounding photos in the album were clearly sequential. A birthday party before, a holiday gathering after, all properly dated, all making chronological sense. Except for that one image. That one impossible moment where Jennifer was looking at something the camera didn't capture, wearing clothes that didn't match her memory of the event she knew the photo was somehow connected to. We started calling these witness photos, images that seemed to document reactions to something without documenting the something itself. Several people found them. Adults and children caught mid-reaction, looking at things outside the frame, their body language suggesting awareness of something significant. But never any indication of what. The dates on these photos didn't match each other. They spanned different months, different years. If they were all documenting the same event, that event had to have been happening at multiple points in time, which was impossible, unless the event itself existed outside normal time. Unless it occupied multiple moments simultaneously, unless when people remember it happening at different times, they're all correct because it happened at all those times. But that was insane. That wasn't how reality worked. Events happened in sequence. They had a specific temporal location. You couldn't have a thing that occurred in winter and summer simultaneously. You couldn't have an experience that took place when you were 10 and when you were 13. Yet the evidence kept suggesting exactly that. And the evidence wasn't vague or uncertain. It was specific. It was documented. It was real. We were trying to solve a mystery using the assumption that reality followed rules we understood. But what if the mystery was that reality had briefly stopped following those rules? What if the reason our memories couldn't align wasn't because memory was broken, but because what we were trying to remember had been broken in a different way. Maybe we need to stop trying to figure out when it happened, Elena said during one of our marathon group chat sessions, and start trying to figure out what it means that we can't. That shifted everything. Because she was right. The confusion itself was data. The contradictions were information. We'd been treating our incompatible memories as a problem to solve, as a puzzle where eventually we'd find the right pieces and everything would click into place. But what if the fact that the pieces didn't fit was the answer? What if memory had fractured for a reason? What if each person's mind had constructed a survivable version of something that wasn't survivable in its true form? We stopped trying to build a consensus timeline. We started documenting the differences instead. We created a massive document listing every single variation, every contradiction, every impossible detail. It grew to dozens of pages, and as it grew, a pattern began to emerge. Each person's memory was consistent within itself. Internally, the logic held. If someone remembered winter, all their details supported winter. Clothing, weather, indoor temperature, everything. If someone remembered summer, their entire memory was coherent to summer. No one had a memory that was internally contradictory. It was only when we compared memories that reality fell apart. It was only in the gaps between minds that impossibility emerged. That meant something. We didn't know what yet, but it meant something significant. Our minds had each constructed a coherent version of an incoherent event, and the coherence itself was suspicious, almost like it was designed, almost like something had been translated into terms we could process, almost like something had been protecting us from the truth. Chapter 4. Physical evidence that contradicts memory. Eleanor worked at the library. She had access to the town archives, boxes of old photographs that local families had donated over the years. Historical preservation was her job. She knew the collection intimately. She started digging, looking for anything from the time frame we'd discussed, or rather, time frames. She found something. In a box labelled with a range of years that covered all our conflicting dates, there were photos from what appeared to be a school event. The images were casual, the kind parents take, slightly blurry with bad lighting and imperfect composition. But the subjects were wrong. People were looking up. Dozens of faces, children and adults, all tilted towards something above the camera's view. Their expressions were identical. Not scared exactly. Not even surprised. Something else. Something that looked like recognition mixed with confusion. Like seeing something familiar in an impossible context. Like watching your childhood home float 6 feet off the ground. Wrong, impossible, but undeniably what you're seeing. And the shadows were wrong. Eleanor noticed it first. She'd been trained in photographic analysis as part of her library science degree. She knew how to identify time of day based on shadow length, how to spot manipulated images, how light behaved in various conditions. These photos violated fundamental rules. The photos were taken indoors. You could see the gymnasium walls in the background, the polished wood floor, the folded bleachers against the wall. But the shadows fell at sharp angles, as if there were a light source above and to the left, positioned maybe 10 feet off the ground, casting light downward at approximately a 45-degree angle. Except gymnasiums don't have lights positioned that way. The fluorescent panels were visible in some shots, standard ceiling-mounted rectangles running in parallel lines across the ceiling. But the shadows didn't match those lights. The shadows ignored the actual light sources and responded to something else entirely. Something else was illuminating the room, something positioned where nothing should have been, and whatever it was, it cast light that behaved like light, creating shadows, illuminating faces, reflecting off surfaces, but coming from a source that didn't exist. But the strangest detail, the photos showed nothing else unusual, no mysterious objects, no strange phenomena, no obvious cause for the reactions, just people reacting to something the camera didn't capture, or couldn't capture. We passed the photos around during our next in-person meeting. Everyone recognized them immediately. "That's it," Marcus said. That's the night. That's definitely it, Jennifer agreed. I can feel it. Like muscle memory, but for emotions. Looking at these makes me feel exactly how I felt that night. Others nodded. The recognition was visceral. But the strange thing was, people recognized photos that contradicted their memories. Marcus, who remembered winter, recognized photos where people were in light clothing. Jennifer, who remembered being at the church, recognized photos clearly taken in the school gymnasium. I, who remembered summer evening, recognized photos that appeared to have been taken at night, based on the darkness visible through the windows. We should have been more skeptical. We should have questioned whether these were really photos of the event. But we couldn't. The certainty was too strong. These images were connected to that night. We knew it the same way you know your own childhood home, even if you see it in an unfamiliar photograph from before you were born. Recognition beyond logic. Elena had done more than just find photos. She'd started cataloguing them by whose family had donated them and when they were allegedly taken. The dates written on the backs of the photos didn't match either. Some were marked with winter dates from different years, others with summer dates from different years, different handwriting, different ink colours, as if multiple people had tried to document the same event and each person marked it according to their own memory. More disturbingly, some photos had been marked and then remarked. You could see where one date had been written, then crossed out, then a different date written in the same handwriting. People had changed their minds, or changed their memories, or memories had changed on them. Look at this one, Elena said, holding up a photo carefully. It showed a group of adults standing in what appeared to be the school parking lot. Night. Cars visible in the background. All the adults were looking in the same direction, off to the left of the frame. Their postures were tense, protective. Several had their arms outstretched as if shielding children who weren't visible in the frame. "That's my mother," Marcus said, pointing to a woman near the centre of the image. "And that's your father," he added, gesturing to another figure. "And that's Principal Thompson. And is that Mayor Hendricks?" We identified nearly every adult in the photo. But none of us remembered seeing the scene. None of us remembered being in the parking lot at night. Yet there they were, our parents, our teachers, authority figures we all recognised, clearly responding to something, clearly protecting us from something, forming a human barrier between something outside the frame and something inside the frame that we'd presumably been part of. "The date on this is from winter," Elena said. "But look at the clothing. Look at what they're wearing. Light jackets, no hats, no gloves, no visible breath in the air, not winter clothing, not winter conditions." "Someone remembered it wrong when they dated the photo," Jennifer suggested. "Or the date is right and the season is wrong," Elena countered. "Or both are right, and the photo somehow shows an impossible combination. We couldn't resolve it. The evidence was there, clear, documented, real. But it contradicted itself in ways that shouldn't be possible. Robert, always the pragmatist, tried a different approach. Let's inventory what's consistent, what appears in all or most of the photos. We spread them out. Maybe 20 photos total, from different sources, allegedly from different times. We looked for commonalities. People looking up or away from the camera. That was universal. Strange shadows inconsistent with visible light sources. Present in about 75% of the images. No direct view of whatever people were reacting to. Universal. Not a single photo showed the object of everyone's attention. Time distortion markers. In several photos, clocks were visible on walls. In one gymnasium shot, the clock showed one time. In another gymnasium shot that appeared to be continuous with the first based on people's positions, the clock showed a time 3 hours later. Same people, same approximate positions, 3-hour jump. "Maybe they're not from the same night," someone suggested, but the clothing matched. The exact same people in the exact same outfits. And in a small town where everyone knew everyone, you couldn't mistake identity. That was definitely Principal Thompson. That was definitely the same yellow shirt on the same child in both photos. Same event, same sequence. Impossible time jump. We found another set of photos that showed the opposite, a sequence where people clearly moved and changed positions, where children who'd been sitting were now standing, where a woman who'd been facing one direction was now facing another. Normal progression, except all the clocks in the background showed the exact same time. 10, 15 minutes worth of activity happening in zero elapsed time according to the clocks. The clocks were broken, Marcus said. They'd stopped working. All of them, Elena asked, in multiple locations. All stopped at specific times that happened to create impossible timelines. He didn't have an answer. The photos should have been evidence. They were evidence. But evidence of what? They proved something happened. They proved people reacted. They proved our memories, however fractured and contradictory, were rooted in genuine experience. But they also proved that whatever happened existed outside normal reality, outside normal time, outside normal physics. The shadows alone, if you accepted them as genuine and not the result of photographic error, meant that light had behaved in ways light doesn't behave. Illumination from nowhere. Shadows cast by sources that didn't exist. What if the cameras captured something our eyes couldn't? Jennifer suggested. What if the weird shadows are actually something visible to the camera but not to human vision? Some wavelength we can't perceive? Then we'd see it in the photos, Elena said. Cameras that capture non-visible wavelengths still display them as visible colours. Infrared shows up as red. Ultraviolet shows up as blue or purple. We'd see something. Unless it's something cameras can't fully capture either, I said. What if both human eyes and cameras are limited in the same way? What if these shadows are the artifact of something that exists outside the spectrum that either can properly perceive, the shadow of something that can't be directly photographed? It sounded insane, but the evidence was insane. We were trying to apply normal logic to fundamentally abnormal data. The photos prove something else, Robert said quietly. He'd been studying them carefully, making notes. Look at the faces. Look at the expressions. Nobody looks terrified. Some look concerned. Some look confused. Some look curious, almost excited. But nobody looks like they're witnessing something horrific. Whatever we saw, whatever this was, it wasn't experienced as a threat in the moment. He was right. Now that he pointed it out, it was obvious. The body language was all wrong for danger. People weren't cowering. They weren't fleeing. They were observing, processing, trying to understand. The adults looked protective, yes, but not panicked. The children looked amazed more than afraid, which contradicted another thing we all remembered: the fear. Every single person, when asked to describe the emotional tone of the memory, said they'd felt afraid, deeply afraid. A fear that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with cosmic wrongness. A fear that came from witnessing something that shouldn't exist. But the photos showed faces that weren't afraid. So either our emotional memory was wrong, or the emotion came later, after the event, during the reconstruction, when our minds were processing what had happened and realized they needed to attach appropriate affect to an inappropriate experience. Fear wasn't what we felt. Fear was what we decided we must have felt, because anything else would have been more disturbing. These photos were breaking reality in subtle ways. Each individual image could maybe be explained. Bad lighting, broken clocks, coincidental expressions. But taken together, they formed a pattern of impossibility. Evidence that something had occurred outside the normal rules by which reality operated. And we'd all been there. We'd all witnessed it. We'd all survived it. Our memories were proof of survival. The fact that we could remember anything at all, even contradictory things, even impossible things, meant we'd endured an encounter with something that should have shattered consciousness entirely. The photos weren't answers. They were confirmation that we needed to keep looking. Because whatever happened that night, it left traces, physical traces, documentation, proof. And if it left proof that cameras could capture, maybe we could find proof in other places too. Other archives, other records, other attempts to document the undocumentable. Chapter 5. The Missing Sensory Detail. As we kept comparing memories, another pattern emerged. Elena noticed it first. She'd been creating a detailed breakdown of each person's account, looking for any kind of structure in the chaos, and she found one. Each person's memory was missing something. Not vague, completely absent. A sensory channel that should have contained information but didn't. And the missing element was different for everyone. Marcus remembered seeing lights and feeling vibration through his entire body, strong enough to make his bones ache. But he couldn't recall any sound. Not muffled sound, not distant sound. Complete auditory absence, even though he remembered people shouting, remembered being told to stay calm. He knew communication happened but couldn't remember hearing it. When pressed, he described understanding what people said without auditory experience, like reading words directly from their intentions. Technically that's impossible, he said. I know people spoke, I know what they said. I just don't remember the sound of it, which should mean I didn't understand them, but I did understand them. Perfectly. Eleanor remembered sound, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, bypassing her ears and resonating directly in her chest cavity. And she remembered the smell of ozone, sharp and electric, so strong it made her eyes water. But she had no visual memory of what caused it. Just darkness punctuated by that sound and smell. When she tried to picture faces, the room, anything visual, her memory went blank. Not black, not empty, just blank, like that channel wasn't receiving data. I know where I was, she said. I can tell you the shape of the space, the number of people who stood near me, but I can't see any of it. I have spatial awareness without vision, which doesn't make sense because spatial awareness comes from vision, but somehow I mapped the entire space without visual input. I remembered light, intense moving light that seemed intelligent in its movements. I remembered the way it made everyone's faces look strange, highlighted from angles that shouldn't exist, casting shadows that defied geometry. But I couldn't remember any physical sensation, not temperature, not the feeling of the ground beneath my feet, not the texture of my clothing, not even my own heartbeat. Just vision, pure and disconnected from physical embodiment. It's like I was a camera, I said. Just an eye recording information without a body to experience it through. Someone else, Michael, remembered only touch. The feeling of being pressed against other people, of hands grabbing his arms, of the floor vibrating beneath him in rhythmic pulses. He remembered texture and pressure and temperature variations in intricate detail. But no light, no sound, no smell. Just physical sensation in a void of other input. Jennifer remembered smell primarily, not just the ozone Elena mentioned, but layers of sense that shifted and changed. Burning metal, fresh rain, something organic and alive, something ancient and mineral, a progression of smells that told a story she couldn't articulate. But her visual and auditory memories were fragmentary at best, and she had no memory of touch at all, despite knowing she'd been in a room full of people. I wasn't in my body, she said. That's what it felt like. I was just nose, just olfactory experience. Everything else was secondary or absent. As we catalogued these sensory gaps, the pattern became undeniable. Each person had experienced the event through a limited channel. But more than that, the missing sense was always the one that would have provided the most disturbing information. Marcus, who couldn't hear, would have heard something that couldn't exist. The sound would have been impossible, maybe not sound at all in the traditional sense, but vibrations in a frequency or pattern that human auditory processing couldn't categorize. His brain protected him by not storing auditory data. Eleanor, who couldn't see, would have seen something that shouldn't be possible, a visual that couldn't be reconciled with known reality. Her brain protected her by not storing visual data. I, who couldn't feel, would have felt something that would have broken my understanding of physical existence. Sensation that didn't map to a body. Experience without embodiment. My brain protected me by not storing proprioceptive data. It was as if each person's memory had filtered out the one detail that would have been impossible to reconcile. the one sense that would have contained information too alien to process, the one channel that would have transmitted truth that consciousness couldn't survive knowing. "We're not remembering through one sense," Robert said slowly. "We're remembering around one sense. Each of us has a hole where the impossible information would have been. But we all remember feeling afraid," someone pointed out. "Fear is an emotion, not a sense. So where does that live?" "Fear might be the only genuine memory we have," Elena said. "The only pure, unfiltered response. Because fear doesn't require understanding. You can be afraid without knowing why. Fear protects you by not needing explanation." That felt right. The fear was real because it didn't require the impossible information to justify itself. It was a reasonable response to unreasonable experience. It was what remained after everything else had been translated or filtered or removed. "So what does this mean?" Jennifer asked. "That we all experienced something but none of us experienced it completely? That we're each carrying a partial truth?" "Maybe not partial," I said. "Maybe complete but translated. Like our brains took in the full experience but could only store it by distributing it across different sensory channels for different people. Maybe the totality of what happened is preserved in our collective memory, but no single person has access to it all. So we'd need to combine our memories to know what actually happened," Marcus said. "But we can't combine them," Elena countered. "They're not compatible. They contradict each other on fundamental facts. We can't merge incompatible data." "Unless the incompatibility is the point," Robert said. "What if the experience was designed to be remembered incorrectly? What if the fractured, contradictory memories are the success state rather than the failure?" That stopped us, because it reframed everything. We'd been treating our memory problems as bugs. But what if they were features? What if something had tested humanity's response to the impossible, and our response, fragmenting memory in ways that preserved function while filtering impossibility, was exactly what was being measured? "That would mean it was deliberate," Jennifer said quietly. "That would mean something engineered this situation. Something made it impossible to remember correctly. Or something knows how human memory works," I said, "and structured an encounter that would necessarily be filtered this way. Not engineered to be misremembered, just structured in a way that misremembering was inevitable, because the alternative was non-function." The implications were staggering. It meant we'd all been exposed to something genuinely alien, something so far outside human sensory processing that accurate memory was impossible. And rather than breaking us, rather than destroying our ability to function, our brains had protected us by constructing survivable versions, different survivable versions, custom-tailored to each person's psychology, each brain finding its own way to process the unprocessable. "We should try combining the memories anyway," Marcus suggested. "Even if they don't fit together, maybe looking at all the pieces will show us something." We tried. We spent hours attempting to construct a unified narrative. If Marcus saw lights and felt vibration, and Elena heard sound and smelled ozone, and I saw light from different angles, and Michael felt specific physical sensations, could we build a complete picture? We couldn't. The pieces didn't just fail to fit, they actively contradicted each other. When Marcus's memory said everyone was in the gymnasium, Eleanor's said everyone was in the church. When I remembered summer evening, others remembered winter night. We couldn't even establish a consistent timeline, let alone a unified sensory experience. But we did learn something. We learned that the event had been overwhelming, full spectrum overwhelming. Every sense overloaded simultaneously with information that didn't fit normal patterns. Our brains had done triage, saving what they could, filtering what would have caused damage, distributing the preservation task differently for each person. We'd survived by not remembering correctly. And that incomplete memory, that fractured, contradictory, impossible memory, was evidence of something so alien that proper memory would have been more destructive than helpful. We were looking at collective trauma. Not trauma from danger, but trauma from encountering something so far outside our reality framework that consciousness itself had to rebuild around it. And the rebuilding process created these strange, incompatible versions, each person getting a custom memory designed to keep them functional. It's almost merciful, Jennifer said softly. Whatever did this to us, whatever showed itself to us, it knew we couldn't handle the truth. So it let us remember lies we could live with. Or our brains did that automatically, Elena said. Maybe this is just what human consciousness does when confronted with the genuinely alien. Maybe every civilization that encounters something beyond their understanding goes through this. Maybe memory itself is the protective barrier that lets intelligence survive contact with the unknowable. Both could be true, or neither. We didn't have enough information to know whether the filtering was imposed on us or generated by us. We only knew it had happened, and it had saved us. Whatever we'd seen, whatever had visited our small town on that impossible night, had been too much, too alien, too outside the boundaries of normal human experience, and we'd survived by forgetting it accurately. That wasn't failure. That was the most sophisticated defense mechanism consciousness possessed. And it had worked perfectly. Chapter 7. The Local Records. Robert worked for the county and had access to old municipal records. After our breakthrough about the sensory filtering, he became obsessed with finding official documentation, something that would ground the event in bureaucratic reality. If it happened, there would be records. Government loved records. Schools loved records. Something had to exist beyond our fractured memories and ambiguous photos. What he found was unsettling in its vagueness. There were references, multiple references across different departments and time frames, but never descriptions, just acknowledgement that something had occurred and needed to be addressed. School board meeting minutes from one of the disputed years contained a single line. Agenda Item 7, addressing parent concerns following the incident. Motion to continue current protocols. Passed unanimously. No details about what incident. No specification of what protocols. Just that calm, bureaucratic acknowledgement that something had happened and decisions had been made. The local newspaper had a small article buried in the community section. The headline read, "Town Gathers During Disruption." The article was 3 sentences long. It mentioned that residents had gathered at an undisclosed location due to an undisclosed situation that had been resolved by local authorities. That was all. No quotes from officials, no description of the disruption, no follow-up articles, just that brief, almost deliberately uninformative notice. This is bizarre, Robert said. Newspapers thrive on detail, even small-town newspapers. They'd normally interview people, get quotes from the mayor, explain what happened. This reads like they were actively avoiding information. Police logs showed increased calls during several of the timeframes we'd identified, but the nature of the calls was marked as resolved on scene, with no further documentation. Dozens of calls over several hours on different dates that matched different people's memories, all marked the same way, all terminated without explanation. Resolved how? Marcus asked when Robert showed us the logs. Resolved by doing what? These are official records. They're supposed to document police activity. Unless documenting it accurately was impossible, Helena suggested. What do you write in a police report when the situation doesn't fit any existing category? When what you responded to can't be described in bureaucratic language? Medical records from the local clinic showed a spike in anxiety-related visits following the various dates we'd identified. People reporting nightmares, stress, difficulty concentrating, a general sense that something was wrong without being able to specify what. But no one described what had triggered these symptoms. The medical notes just indicated following recent event without clarification. The clinic records were particularly interesting because they included a note from the primary physician at the time, now retired, expressing concern about the number of patients presenting with similar symptoms, but unable to articulate causation, recommending community support resources for stress management following undisclosed collective experience. Undisclosed collective experience. That phrase appeared multiple times in different documents. Always undisclosed. Always collective. Always experience rather than incident or event, as if the documentation couldn't quite commit to claiming something external had happened. School attendance records showed an anomaly that made no sense. For a period of 3 days across multiple potential dates in multiple years, Attendance was marked, but no daily activities were recorded. Classes happened, students were present, teachers were present, but there were no lesson plans filed, no assignments noted, no record of what actually occurred during those school days, just attendance marks indicating everyone was there. How is that possible? Jennifer asked. Teachers have to file lesson plans. It's required. The school board audits them. You can't just have empty days in the official record. Unless filing accurate lesson plans would have required describing what actually happened during those days, Robert said, and that was impossible. So they filed attendance, proof people were at school, but nothing about what occurred while they were there. We found similar gaps in other institutional records. Church bulletins from around the various dates showed cancelled services or services with no notes about topic or attendance. The town council minutes showed meetings that occurred, but had no agenda items listed. The library circulation records showed dates where the building was open, according to the logs, but no books were checked out or returned. It was as if the entire town's institutional infrastructure had experienced the same filtering our individual memories had. Official records existed, proving time had passed and activities had occurred, but the content of those activities was mysteriously absent. This isn't cover-up, Elena said, studying the document spread across her dining room table. This is accommodation. The town didn't hide what happened. The town couldn't record what happened, so it recorded that something happened while leaving the something undefined. But why? Marcus asked. Why wouldn't someone, a reporter, a teacher, a town official, just write down what they saw? Because they couldn't, I said, finally understanding. Not wouldn't, couldn't. The same mechanism that filtered our personal memories filtered the official record. When people tried to document it, they found themselves unable to articulate it. Not blocked by others, blocked by their own inability to translate the experience into documentary language. Robert found one more document that confirmed this. A memo from the school superintendent to staff, dated approximately 1 week after one of the possible event dates. The memo was remarkable for what it attempted to say without saying anything. Dear staff, regarding the recent situation about which we cannot provide full detail, please note that all standard protocols remain in effect. Students should be monitored for signs of stress, but excessive discussion of the matter is discouraged, as it appears to exacerbate anxiety rather than relieve it. Parents have been notified that the situation was handled appropriately and no further action is required. If you find yourself struggling to document recent activities in your records, please use general terminology and focus on student well-being rather than specific incident details. Thank you for your professionalism during this unusual time. The memo said everything by saying nothing. It acknowledged that something had happened. It acknowledged that documenting it was difficult. It acknowledged that discussing it was problematic. And it provided guidance for navigating an undefinable situation through bureaucratic vagueness. Excessive discussion exacerbates anxiety, Elena read aloud. That's interesting. That suggests they tried talking about it and found that talking made it worse. Makes sense, Robert said. If everyone's memory is different, trying to establish consensus would just create conflict and confusion. Better to acknowledge something happened and move on without forcing alignment. The official records told the same story our personal investigation had uncovered. Something impossible had occurred. The town had experienced it collectively, and the town had collectively failed to create a unified narrative because a unified narrative was impossible. The experience exceeded the capacity of both individual and institutional memory to process it accurately. What made it haunting was the calm acceptance in these documents. No panic, no demands for investigation, no calls for explanation, just quiet acknowledgement and peaceful continuation, as if the town had organically understood that some experiences exist beyond documentation, beyond consensus, beyond explanation. The records weren't evidence of forgetting. They were evidence of a community choosing to function despite not fully understanding what they'd functioned through. They were proof that humans can continue, can maintain social structures and institutions and normalcy even after encountering something that should have shattered all of that. We'd survived not just individually but collectively, and the collective survival looked like bureaucratic vagueness, institutional gaps, and official documents that said as little as possible while confirming that something requiring documentation had definitely occurred. It was the most human response possible to the inhuman. We wrote it down without writing it down. We remembered by not quite remembering. We moved forward while carrying an impossible shared past, and life went on. School continued, church continued, town council met, library circulated books. The mechanisms of community kept functioning because humans are remarkably good at functioning, despite confusion, despite contradiction, despite cosmic uncertainty. The records proved we'd survived, and survival looked like incomplete documentation, vague references, and the quiet agreement that some things don't need to be fully explained to be acknowledged as real. Chapter 8. The Unspoken Agreement. The more we investigated, the clearer it became that the town had made a choice. Not a conscious one, not a coordinated one, but a choice nonetheless. After the event, whatever it was, people had simply moved on. There were no town meetings to discuss it, no parent groups demanding answers, no investigative committees or official inquiries. Life continued. People went to work, kids went to school. The rhythm of small-town existence resumed without interruption. We found this staggering. In a town where a broken stoplight would generate 3 weeks of heated debate at the coffee shop, where the decision to change the school mascot had caused a near schism in the community, where everyone had opinions about everyone else's business, how had something this significant been absorbed without discussion? Then Elena found something in her mother's journal. Elena's mother had been a meticulous diary keeper, documenting daily life in careful detail since before Elena was born. The journals filled an entire bookshelf in her parents' home. Decades of handwritten observations, thoughts, records of mundane and significant moments alike. Her mother recorded what she ate, what she wore, what the weather was like, what Elena did, what happened at work, what was discussed at church. Everything. The entries around the event were bizarre. The day before, normal entry, weather, meals, Elena's homework progress, a neighbour's new car, plans for the weekend, several paragraphs of detailed observation in her mother's neat handwriting. The day after, normal entry, weather, meals, Eleanor's mood, grocery shopping, a phone call with a friend. Again, detailed and comprehensive. The day of the event, blank, not missing. The page was there. The date was written at the top in the same careful hand, but the rest of the page was empty except for one line in the middle. We were all together. Everything is fine now. Eleanor called her mother and asked about it. "Oh, that was a strange time," her mother said vaguely. "I remember feeling like I should write something, but I couldn't quite. I tried to write about what happened, but every time I started, the words didn't feel right. They felt dishonest somehow. Not because they were lies, but because they were incomplete. Like writing anything specific would be worse than writing nothing at all." "But what did happen?" Eleanor pressed. Her mother paused for a long time. "Honey, I don't know how to answer that. I remember being there. I remember you being there. I remember other people. I remember feeling like something very important was occurring. But when I try to be more specific, it's like trying to describe a dream after you've woken up. You know you dreamed something significant, but the details won't stay in your mind long enough to communicate them." "But you wrote that everything was fine," Elena said. "Why did you write that specifically?" "Because it was true," her mother said simply. "Whatever happened, and something definitely happened, it ended with everyone safe. That felt important to record. The safety, the togetherness, those were the only true things I could put into words." That phrase, "we were all together, everything is fine now," appeared in multiple places once we started looking. Marcus found it in a letter his father had written to a relative. Jennifer found it in an old church bulletin as a closing blessing. Michael found it carved into a bench at the park, undated but in a style consistent with that time period. I found it in my own mother's handwriting on a calendar square for one of the disputed dates. The exact same phrase, Different handwriting, different contexts, different sources, but the exact same words, as if that was the only thing that could be said because saying anything else would require saying too much. It's like a mantra, Robert said, or a spell, something you repeat to ward off the need for further explanation. We started asking around more carefully, talking to people who'd been adults during that time, trying to gauge what the community-wide response had been. We were careful not to lead them, not to suggest anything. We just asked generally about that period, about whether they remembered anything unusual. Most people deflected. "Oh, that was a long time ago," or "My memory of those years is pretty fuzzy," or "Why are you asking about that?" The last question, delivered with a tone that suggested they knew exactly why we were asking, but preferred we didn't push. A few people were more forthcoming, but in strange ways. The former police chief, now well into his 80s, said, "Some things happen that don't fit into reports. That's just how it is. You learn in this job that reality is bigger than the paperwork. Good officers know when to document and when to just manage. We managed. Everyone was safe. That's what mattered." The retired school principal, whom we found living in a nursing home one town over, said, "You kids are stirring up something that settled a long time ago. That's your right, I suppose. You were there. You have questions. But let me tell you something. Not everything that happens needs to be explained. Sometimes the explanation would cause more harm than the mystery. We decided, well, not decided. It wasn't that organized. But we collectively understood that moving forward was healthier than looking back. And we were right. Look at you. You all grew up fine, successful, well-adjusted. That happened because we didn't dwell." "But what were we not supposed to dwell on?" Jennifer asked. The principal smiled sadly. "If I could answer that question clearly, honey, we would have dwelled on it. The fact that I can't answer it, the fact that nobody can, that's exactly why we didn't." The former mayor was the most direct. We found him at the hardware store he'd owned for 40 years. When we asked about the event, he actually laughed. "You know what's funny?" he said. "Every few years, someone from your generation asks about that night, and every time I try to explain it, and every time I fail. Not because I'm hiding anything, because there's nothing to hide. We all remember it happened. We all remember being there. We all remember it being important. But the specifics? They're smoke. You can see smoke. You know it's real. But if you try to grab it, you come away with nothing." "So the town just agreed not to talk about it?" Marcus asked. "No," the mayor said firmly. "The town tried to talk about it. In the days after, people tried. But every conversation went in circles. People would start describing what happened and quickly realize they were describing different things. And instead of creating understanding, the discussions created confusion and anxiety. People got upset. Relationships got strained. So gradually, organically, we stopped trying. We acknowledged that something happened. We confirmed everyone was safe. And we moved on." "That seems wrong," I said. "That seems like giving up on truth." "Maybe," the mayor said. "Or maybe it's recognizing that truth comes in different forms. The truth is something happened. The truth is we survived it. The truth is we remained a community afterward. Those truths are accessible. The truth about what exactly happened. That truth might not be accessible to human minds, and chasing an inaccessible truth at the cost of accessible ones, that's not wisdom. That's stubbornness." It started to make sense. The town hadn't covered anything up. The town had accommodated something impossible by creating a shared framework of acceptable non-discussion. Not silence, not secrecy, just mutual recognition that certain experiences exist beyond language, beyond consensus reality, and trying to force them into words would damage the careful translations our minds had constructed to protect us. It was a survival mechanism at the community level, matching the survival mechanisms at the individual level. Just as each person's brain had filtered the experience to prevent psychological damage, the community had filtered discussion of the experience to prevent social damage. Both were acts of protection. Both were forms of intelligence responding to a threat that was more subtle than physical danger. The threat was cognitive. The threat was the possibility that forcing consensus on an event that couldn't support consensus would fracture the community as surely as the event itself could have fractured individual minds. So the community adapted. It found a way to acknowledge without defining, to remember without agreeing, to carry forward without resolution. And it had worked. The town remained functional. Relationships remained intact. Institutions continued serving their purposes. Life went on with grace and normalcy despite, or perhaps because of, the shared acceptance of an inexplicable past. Maybe that's what makes us human, Eleanor said during one of our late-night discussions. The ability to function despite confusion. The ability to move forward carrying questions we can't answer. Most animals need certainty to survive. They need to understand threat, understand safety, understand cause and effect. But humans? We can tolerate cosmic uncertainty. We can shrug at the inexplicable and make lunch anyway. Or maybe that's what makes this town special, Jennifer countered. Maybe most communities would have torn themselves apart trying to force consensus. Maybe we got lucky. Maybe the specific combination of people and personalities and local culture allowed for this graceful accommodation. Or maybe this happens everywhere, I said. Maybe encounters with the inexplicable are more common than we think, and communities all over the world have these shared experiences that never get properly discussed or defined. Maybe humanity is constantly brushing against something beyond understanding, and we survive it through exactly this mechanism. Vague acknowledgement and social agreement not to push for clarity. We couldn't know. But the pattern was clear. Our town had faced something impossible and had survived by not forcing it to be possible, by not demanding it make sense, by not requiring everyone's experience to align. The unspoken agreement wasn't weakness. It was sophisticated collective intelligence. It was the social equivalent of our individual memory filtering, a protective mechanism that preserved function by distributing the burden of the impossible across the entire community in a way that no individual had to carry too much weight. We were all together. Everything is fine now. Those words weren't denial. They were acknowledgement of the only things that could be safely acknowledged. Togetherness, the shared experience, fineness, the survival. Everything else was unnecessary detail that would cause more problems than solutions. The town had been wise, and we, digging into it 20 years later, were beginning to understand that wisdom. We could excavate the mystery. We could document the contradictions. We could prove something happened. But maybe we couldn't, and shouldn't, try to force it into coherence. Maybe the healthy response was the one the town had already found. Acknowledge, accept, move forward. Some truths were meant to remain undefined, not because they weren't real, but because their reality exceeded the framework by which definition occurred. Chapter 9. The Realization. Late one night, alone in my hotel room, the full understanding hit me. I'd been lying awake for hours, thinking through everything we'd discovered, and suddenly all the pieces aligned. The event wasn't forgotten. It couldn't be forgotten. It was too significant, too impactful, too deeply carved into the collective memory of everyone who experienced it. But it also couldn't be remembered accurately, because human neurology wasn't equipped to process what actually happened. So our brains did something remarkable. They created individualized translations, custom-built memories that preserved the emotional truth, the significance, the impact, while replacing the incomprehensible details with comprehensible substitutes. Each person got the version they could survive, the version that wouldn't break their understanding of reality. We hadn't been manipulated. We hadn't been programmed or altered by some external force. This was our own neurology doing what it evolved to do, protect consciousness from information that would damage it. Our brains looked at something impossible and said, I can't store this as is, but I can store something equivalent. And they did. The conflicting timelines made perfect sense. If the event existed outside normal causality, existing in multiple moments simultaneously or in no moment specifically, Each brain would anchor it to whenever made the most psychological sense for that individual. Someone stressed about upcoming exams might anchor it to the period right before prom. Someone who associated major events with winter might place it in cold weather. Someone whose strongest memories were of summer freedom might place it there. The brain used personal chronological landmarks to file something that had no proper chronological location. The conflicting locations made perfect sense. If the actual location was incomprehensible, or existed in some state that couldn't be mapped to normal geography, each brain would substitute the location that best represented gathering safety or authority in their personal symbolic lexicon. For some, that was the school. For others, the church. For others, somewhere else entirely. The brain used physical metaphors for something that might not have had a proper physical location. The missing senses made perfect sense. Each person's memory excluded the sensory input that would have been most damaging, the input that couldn't be translated into safe terms. Vision, hearing, smell, touch, taste. Whatever sense would have conveyed the most disturbing truth simply wasn't stored, not erased, not blocked, just never encoded in the first place, because encoding it would have required processing information that would damage the processor. And the physical evidence aligned with this. The photographs captured genuine reactions to something that cameras couldn't record. The shadows were wrong because the light source wasn't something that created normal photonic shadows. It was something else masquerading as light, or interacting with light in ways that created artifacts the camera could capture but couldn't properly represent. The official records were vague because the people writing them were translating an experience even as they documented it, unable to access the true memory, while simultaneously knowing something significant had occurred. We'd encountered something, all of us, something that existed beyond human perception, something so far outside our evolutionary framework for understanding reality that direct experience would have been destructive, and rather than destroying us, rather than driving us mad with impossible information, our brains had saved us. They'd created survivable versions of an unsurvivable experience. The encounter succeeded precisely because we couldn't remember it correctly. I got out of bed and opened my laptop, started typing everything I was thinking. The pieces were fitting together in a way that felt simultaneously terrifying and revelatory. What if this was common? What if contact with non-human intelligence happened regularly, but was necessarily filtered through exactly this mechanism? What if every UFO report, every encounter story, every abduction narrative was a translation of genuine contact that the experiencer's brain had processed into the most comprehensible form available? That would explain the contradictions in those reports, the varying details, the way people described similar experiences in wildly different terms, not because they were lying or confused, but because their brains were each solving the same problem: how to remember the unrememberable, using different solutions. It would explain why physical evidence was always ambiguous, not because the events weren't real, but because the events existed in a way that physical evidence couldn't properly capture. Cameras could photograph reactions, they could capture artifacts, strange shadows, unusual light, distorted backgrounds, but they couldn't capture the thing itself because the thing itself existed outside the spectrum of reality that cameras were designed to document. It would explain why governments couldn't provide clear answers even when they wanted to, not because of conspiracy, but because the institutional knowledge was as filtered and contradictory as individual memory. Officials who investigated these events encountered the same translation problem. They found evidence, they found witnesses, but they couldn't construct a unified narrative because unified narratives were impossible when the underlying reality exceeded the framework by which narratives were constructed. The whole phenomenon, global, across cultures, across centuries, might be humanity repeatedly encountering something beyond our perceptual capacity and repeatedly translating it into manageable forms. The forms varied because different cultures provided different translation frameworks, but the underlying experience might be identical. The aliens, the angels, the fairies, the gods, all different cultural translations of the same incomprehensible contact, and the encounters continued because they were successful. Because whatever was making contact, if something was deliberately making contact, had learned that humans could survive it, that we had built-in protective mechanisms, that we could experience the impossible and continue functioning afterward. We were being tested, not for our technology or our intelligence or our worthiness, for our cognitive resilience, for our ability to encounter the alien and maintain coherent consciousness despite not being able to accurately comprehend what we'd encountered and we'd passed. Not just my town, every person who'd ever reported an unexplainable experience and then continued living their life had passed. The test wasn't whether we could understand. The test was whether we could fail to understand without failing to function. I felt a strange peace settling over me. For weeks, we'd been treating our fractured memories as a problem, as something broken that needed fixing. But they weren't broken. They were working exactly as designed. And the design was brilliant. Human consciousness had evolved a fail-safe mechanism. When reality exceeded processing capacity, memory translated rather than recorded. It preserved function at the cost of accuracy. And that trade-off, that sacrificing of perfect knowledge for continued ability to operate, was sophisticated intelligence at work. We weren't blind or limited or damaged. We were protected. And the protection was so elegant, so seamless, that we didn't even notice it happening. We just woke up the next day with memories that made sense, even if they didn't make sense when compared to others' memories, and we moved on, and we survived. Whatever had visited our town that night had learned something about humanity, had observed our response to the impossible, and our response had been to translate it into the possible, even if that meant creating dozens of different possible versions that contradicted each other. That was remarkable. That was worth observing. That might even be what made humanity interesting to something far more advanced. Not our technology, which was primitive compared to beings that could manipulate reality itself. Not our culture, which was young compared to civilizations that might span millennia. But our cognitive adaptability, our ability to encounter the truly other and create functional understanding even when true understanding was impossible. I emailed the group my thoughts. The responses came slowly over the next hours as people woke up and checked their phones. Elena, this feels right. This feels like the answer we've been looking for. Not what happened, but why we can't agree on what happened. Marcus, so we're not crazy. We're protected. I can live with that. Jennifer, but do you think they knew? The aliens or whatever they were? Do you think they knew we'd remember it wrong? Robert, maybe they were counting on it. Maybe that's the whole point of first contact. Not to be remembered accurately, but to test whether we can survive not remembering accurately. And finally from Michael, does this mean it could happen again? If they learned we could handle it, could they come back? That was the question that kept me awake for the rest of the night. If our response had been observed and deemed successful, would the observers return? Would they test again? Or had they learned everything they needed to learn from that one encounter? Or maybe, and this thought was even more unsettling, maybe they'd never left. Maybe they were constantly present, constantly observing, and we simply couldn't perceive them except during moments when they deliberately made themselves available to human consciousness. And those moments were necessarily translated into comprehensible but inaccurate forms. Maybe we were always swimming in an ocean of reality we couldn't perceive, and occasionally something from that ocean touched us, and we felt it as something alien and impossible. And our brains did what they'd evolved to do. They protected us by translating the experience into something survivable. And that protection was why humanity continued. Why we could encounter the unknown repeatedly throughout history and not be destroyed by it. Why we could brush against cosmic truth and wake up the next day still functional, still ourselves, still capable of making lunch and going to work and loving our families. We were resilient in a way we didn't fully appreciate, and that resilience might be the most human thing about us. Chapter 10. Why it never happened again. The last piece of the puzzle was why. Why had this happened? Why to us? Why only once? We had no direct evidence, of course, no communication from the visitors, no message explaining their purpose, no follow-up contact, just that one night, or multiple versions of one night, and then nothing. 2 decades of silence, 2 decades of normal life interrupted only by the questions we couldn't stop asking. But patterns emerged as we talked, as we compared notes not just on what we remembered, but on what happened afterward, on what changed, on what stayed the same. The event had observed something, measured something, tested something. Not our physical responses. There was no medical experiment, no physical examination, nothing invasive or harmful. Not our technology or our civilization. A small town in the Midwest had nothing unique to offer in that regard. Something deeper. It had tested how we reconstructed reality, how consciousness handled the impossible, how memory created continuity when direct experience couldn't. It had observed the mechanism by which intelligent beings protected themselves from information that exceeded their processing capacity. And it only needed to happen once because the data was complete. Every person produced a different translation. Every brain solved the problem of impossible memory in a unique way. The variations themselves were the result. The diversity of responses, the contradictory memories, the personalized filtering, that was the answer to whatever question was being asked. The experiment wasn't about what we saw or experienced. It was about how we remembered seeing and experiencing it. It was about the layer between raw input and stored memory, about the translation engine that made consciousness possible in a universe full of things consciousness couldn't directly process. That's why there were no follow-ups, no repeat events, no ongoing encounters. The phenomenon, whatever it was, had learned what it needed to learn. We demonstrated that human consciousness had a built-in protection mechanism against reality that exceeded our architecture. We'd shown that when confronted with the truly alien, the truly other, we didn't break, we translated. And translation, while imperfect, allowed function, allowed survival, allowed continuation. That might have been the valuable insight. That intelligence didn't require perfect perception. That consciousness could thrive even when surrounded by truth it couldn't directly access. That the filter itself, the mechanism that incorrectly stored impossible information as possible information, was a feature of intelligence rather than a bug. Marcus put it perfectly during one of our last conversations before everyone headed back to their regular lives. Maybe first contact already happened. Maybe it happens all the time. We just can't know it happened because knowing it correctly would destroy the knowing part of us. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because it meant we might be constantly surrounded by realities we couldn't perceive, constantly interacting with forces we couldn't recognize, constantly being observed or tested or contacted in ways that left no trace we could consciously access. Comforting because it meant we were protected. Our consciousness had shields we didn't know we needed until something tested them, and those shields worked. We survived. We continued. We built lives and memories and meaning on top of an experience that shouldn't have been survivable. That wasn't failure of perception. That was triumph of consciousness. Whatever observed us that night got its answer. Humans can encounter the impossible and create possible versions. We can experience what we can't understand and still maintain coherent identity. We're protected by the very limitations that seem to constrain us. Our inability to perceive ultimate reality wasn't weakness. It was the sophisticated defense mechanism that allowed us to exist in a universe full of things that would otherwise overwhelm consciousness. The event never repeated because it succeeded perfectly the first time. One data point was sufficient. One small town full of people whose brains each solved the translation problem differently demonstrated the principle clearly. Further testing would have been redundant. Or maybe it repeated constantly, and we just didn't notice. Maybe our whole lives were full of encounters we translated into mundane experience. Maybe the truly alien wasn't rare. Maybe our perception of the alien as rare was itself a translation, a way of making constant contact with the impossible feel manageable by categorizing it as exceptional. We'd never know. And perhaps that was the point. Perhaps being unable to know was exactly what made us worth contacting in the first place. I thought about what my town looked like from outside. A dot on a map. 800 people living unremarkable lives. Nothing special. Nothing that would attract attention. But maybe that was precisely why it was chosen. Because the response they were testing wasn't dependent on sophistication or advancement. It was fundamental to human consciousness. And a small town demonstrated it as clearly as a city or a nation, or the species as a whole would have. We were a sample, a data point, a test subject, and we'd performed beautifully without knowing we were performing at all. The visitors, if that's what they were, had probably moved on, probably testing other species, other forms of consciousness, building a map of how intelligence handled reality that exceeded its processing architecture. Our results were filed somewhere, in some form we couldn't imagine, serving some purpose we'd never understand, and that was fine. We didn't need to understand it. We just needed to have survived it, and we had. Epilogue. The encounter. We survived. I'm back home now, back in the city, far from that small town where I grew up. But I think about it constantly, about that night, about what we learned, about what we'll never know. Sometimes I wonder if they're disappointed in us, whatever they were, if they looked at humanity and saw a species trapped in neurological translation, forever separated from true reality by layers of protective interpretation, if they found us limited, insufficient, blind. But I don't think that's it. I think they found exactly what they were looking for. Evidence that consciousness can persist in the face of the truly alien. That intelligence can function even when true understanding is impossible. That we're adapted not just to our environment, but to the possibility of encountering things beyond our environment. Maybe that's what makes consciousness valuable in the universe. Not our ability to perceive truth, but our ability to survive falsehood when truth would be fatal. Not our capacity for perfect knowledge, but our capacity to function with imperfect knowledge. Not our understanding of reality, but our ability to operate despite not understanding reality. Maybe every intelligent species has this mechanism. Maybe it's the prerequisite for intelligence itself, the capacity to create workable fictions when reality becomes unworkable. Maybe consciousness arose precisely because it could filter and translate, because perfect perception of everything would paralyze rather than enable action. Or maybe we're unique. Maybe we're the species that can be shown the impossible and construct elaborate, individualized, protective lies about what we saw, and then live peacefully with those lies forever. Maybe that's our evolutionary gift. Maybe that's what makes humanity special in a cosmos full of intelligence. Not our wisdom or our technology or our culture, but our ability to be fundamentally wrong about something and still thrive. I'll never know what really happened that night. None of us will. Our brains made sure of that when they translated an impossible experience into dozens of possible ones. But I know something did happen. Something real. Something significant. Something that found us worthy of observation precisely because observation was impossible. The group chat is still active. We still compare notes sometimes, though less frequently now. The memories haven't converged. They never will. We've stopped trying to find consensus because we understand now that consensus was never the point. The variation was the point. The protection was the point. The survival was the point. Eleanor summed it up best last week when someone new joined the chat. Another person from town who'd heard about our investigation and wanted to share their memories. Maybe the most human thing we can do is remember together while remembering differently. Maybe that's what they wanted to see, that we can share an experience without sharing a memory, that we can have collective truth without identical truth. I think she's right. I think that's exactly what was tested, and I think we passed. We didn't forget what happened. We couldn't forget what happened. It was too significant, too impactful. too deeply carved into our consciousness to fade away like normal memories do. But we also couldn't remember what happened. We couldn't access the truth of it, couldn't reconstruct the event as it actually occurred. So we did something more remarkable. We remembered what we were able to, and that was enough. That was sufficient. That was proof of something valuable. We encountered the alien. We survived the impossible. We protected each other through the act of remembering differently, because if we'd all remembered the same thing, that thing would have been something we couldn't live with. The diversity of our memories was the mechanism by which collective sanity was preserved. The encounter worked because we failed to accurately remember it, and in that failure, we demonstrated something success never could have shown. That consciousness isn't about perceiving reality, it's about surviving it. It's about taking in more information than you can process and finding a way to store it that allows you to wake up the next day still functional, still yourself, still capable of love and work and meaning. Whatever observed us that night learned that about humanity, and then they left us alone. Not because we failed, because we succeeded brilliantly at the one test that mattered. We proved we could encounter the other and remain ourselves. Even if remaining ourselves meant never knowing what the other really was, even if remaining ourselves meant accepting that reality was bigger than our ability to comprehend it, even if remaining ourselves meant living with questions we'd never answer and contradictions we'd never resolve, that's not a limitation. That's a superpower. And somewhere, in some way we'll never perceive, in some dimension or reality or consciousness we can't access. I think they know that now, because we showed them one impossible night in a small town where everyone remembers what happened, just not the same way, and that difference saved us all, because if we'd all remembered the same impossible thing, that impossible thing would have broken us all the same way. But we each remembered a different possible thing, custom-tailored to our individual psychology, perfectly calibrated to allow survival. That's elegant, that's sophisticated. That's the kind of solution to an impossible problem that suggests consciousness itself is more remarkable than we give it credit for. We're not broken recorders, we're brilliant translators. We take reality as it comes, filter what would destroy us, and create functional understanding, even when perfect understanding is impossible, and we do it automatically, without training, without conscious effort. Our brains just do it. They protect us. They preserve us. They let us continue. The event in my hometown wasn't unique. I understand that now. It happens everywhere in different forms to different people. Every unexplained experience, every moment of impossible beauty or cosmic horror, every encounter with something beyond normal reality, they're all translated, filtered, rendered survivable. We live in a universe full of things we can't directly perceive, and we survive because we don't need to perceive them directly. We just need to perceive them sufficiently. And sufficient perception looks like translation, like interpretation, like customized versions of truth that preserve the important parts, the emotional truth, the experiential truth, the consequential truth, while replacing the incomprehensible parts with comprehensible metaphors. That's what memory is. That's what consciousness is. That's what being human is. We're not witnesses to reality. We're translators of reality. And the translation, while imperfect, is what allows us to exist in a cosmos that would otherwise be too much for beings of our particular architecture to handle. So I'm grateful for the event, even though I don't know what it really was. Grateful for my fractured memory, because it means I survived something that would have destroyed accurate memory. Grateful for the contradiction, because it means my brain cared more about my function than about my perfect recollection. And I'm grateful for my town, for the way we collectively handled something that could have torn us apart, for the wisdom of moving forward without forcing consensus, for the grace of acknowledging shared experience without demanding shared details. We were all together. Everything is fine now. Those words still resonate. They're still true. They're more true than any detailed description could ever be, because they capture what matters, the survival, the togetherness, the fineness of our continued existence despite cosmic disruption. Whatever happened that night, we survived it together, and survival together while remembering separately is perhaps the most profound form of connection consciousness can achieve. That's the story. That's the truth we can access. And it's enough. Maybe even more than enough. Maybe it's everything.
There exists a window of time that almost no one observes, not because it's hidden, but because observation requires consciousness, and consciousness requires witnesses. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, cities don't sleep so much as they idle. Traffic lights cycle through their patterns for empty intersections. Security cameras record hallways no one walks. Computer systems run diagnostics that no one monitors in real time. This is when I saw it. Or rather, this is when I noticed something that suggested I had been seeing it all along. My name is Marcus Webb, and for the past 11 years I've worked as a systems coordinator for the Regional Water Treatment Authority. It's not glamorous work. Most people don't think about where their water comes from, or how it's managed, until something goes catastrophically wrong. My job is to make sure nothing goes catastrophically wrong. I monitor flow rates, chemical balances, pressure differentials across a network of pumping stations, and treatment facilities that serve about 200,000 people. I work the overnight shift, midnight to 8 in the morning, 4 days a week. The pay differential makes it worth the circadian disruption, and honestly, I prefer it. No meetings, no supervisors hovering, just me, 6 monitors, and the quiet hum of systems doing exactly what they're designed to do. The event I'm about to describe didn't announce itself. There were no lights in the sky, no mysterious figures, no equipment failures or power surges. What happened was far more subtle, and in retrospect, far more unsettling. It started with a number that was technically correct, but contextually impossible. Chapter 1. The Anomaly on a Familiar Screen. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. The timestamp read 3:17. I had been monitoring a routine chlorination cycle at Treatment Plant 7, one of our smaller facilities located about 15 miles outside the city proper. The process is automated, but we maintain human oversight because water treatment operates on the principle that redundancy saves lives. The chlorine injection rate was reading 0.72 parts per million, well within acceptable parameters. The flow rate through the contact chamber showed 2.4 million gallons per day. Normal for that time of night. The residual chlorine reading at the discharge point measured 0.68 parts per million. I had been staring at these numbers for maybe 20 seconds before I realised what was wrong. The contact time didn't match. In water treatment, contact time is the duration that water spends in contact with chlorine before it's considered disinfected. It's a function of volume and flow rate. Given the size of Plant 7's contact chamber and the flow rate being reported, the contact time should have been roughly 90 minutes. The system was reporting 93 minutes. 3 minutes isn't much. It wouldn't trigger any alarms. The system builds in tolerances for exactly these kinds of minor variations. Equipment drifts, calibrations shift, Real-world physics rarely aligns perfectly with theoretical calculations. But I had been doing this job for 11 years. I knew Plant 7 systems intimately. A 3-minute drift didn't happen gradually. It happened when something in the flow dynamics changed. I checked the influent delta, no variation. I checked the chamber level sensors, stable. I pulled up the historical logs and scrolled back through the past 6 hours. The drift had appeared suddenly at 2:41 in the morning, 36 minutes ago. The contact time had been 90 minutes at 2:40. At 2:41, it jumped to 93 minutes, and it had stayed there. I ran a diagnostic on the flow meters. They came back clean. I checked for air pockets in the contact chamber that might create dead zones. Nothing. I reviewed the chemical feed logs to see if someone had adjusted injection rates, without logging it properly. All normal. The numbers made sense individually. They just didn't make sense together. I logged the discrepancy as a minor anomaly and flagged it for the day shift to investigate. Probably a sensor issue. Probably nothing. Then I noticed something else. The moment I flagged the issue and looked away from that screen to check another facility, the contact time corrected itself. When I looked back, it read 90 minutes again. Exactly 90 minutes. I stared at the screen for a full minute. The reading held stable. 90.0 minutes. Not 90.1. Not 89.9. Exactly 90. I unflagged my report and deleted the notation. I told myself I had misread it the first time. Fatigue. Too much coffee. Not enough sleep before the shift. But I didn't believe that. I have a near photographic memory for numbers. It's why I'm good at this job. I opened a blank document and typed Plant 7 contact time anomaly 2:41 to 3:17. 93 minutes reported, then corrected to 90 on observation. I saved it to my personal drive, not the system logs. I didn't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do. The rest of the shift passed without incident. I didn't mention it to the day crew during shift change. What would I even say? I saw a number that changed when I stopped looking at it. They'd think I was losing it. I drove home as the sun came up, went to bed, and slept poorly. Chapter 2. Corroboration without communication. 3 nights later, I was back on shift. Different day of the week, same time window. I had almost convinced myself the contact time thing had been exactly what I told myself it was. Misread data, tired eyes, coincidental timing. Then the temperature readings started drifting. Plant 7 again. This time, it was the raw water intake temperature. Our sensors monitor the temperature of incoming water because it affects chemical, dosing rates, and biological activity. The intake pulls from a reservoir that maintains fairly stable temperatures, especially at depth. At 2:39 in the morning, the intake temperature read 54.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Standard for that time of year. At 2:43 it read 54.7. At 2:47 it was at 55.1. A 9/10 degree rise in 8 minutes. That doesn't happen. Water temperature changes slowly. Even if there were a thermal layer mixing event in the reservoir, we'd see gradual fluctuation, not a steady linear increase. I checked the outflow temperature from the treatment process. It had risen proportionally. I checked the ambient air temperature at the facility. It had actually dropped slightly. I checked weather data for the area. Clear skies, no wind, no atmospheric anomalies. The temperature continued to climb. 55.3, 55.6, 55.8. I was reaching for the phone to call the facility maintenance line when the increase stopped. The reading held at 56.0 degrees. Then over the next 12 minutes, it dropped back to 54.2, exactly where it had started. The rise had been 0.1 degrees per minute. The decline was 0.15 degrees per minute, almost like something was testing the system's response time. or measuring its thermal characteristics. I documented it. Personal file again. Same instinct as before. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called Raymond Torres. Raymond works the same shift I do, but he monitors electrical grid distribution for the Regional Power Authority. Different agency, different systems, but we occasionally overlap on infrastructure coordination. We'd grabbed coffee a few times. He was solid, rational, not prone to jumping to conclusions. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just asked him a hypothetical. Ray, if you saw system behavior that was technically within parameters, but contextually weird, would you report it? There was a long pause. Then, what kind of weird? The kind where nothing is actually wrong, but the numbers don't tell the story they should. Another pause. You seeing something? Maybe. You? He was quiet for maybe 15 seconds. Then, yeah, Tuesday night. Voltage phase imbalances on a distribution substation. Not enough to trigger alerts, but enough to notice. Came and went over about 40 minutes. I checked everything. Equipment's fine. Load patterns were normal. It just happened. What time, I asked? Started around 2:30. Resolved by 3:20. My stomach tightened. Which substation? Station 44. Serves the industrial corridor and the East County area. Plant 7 was in the East County area. Did you report it? I asked. I logged it. Got a response saying they'd review it. Haven't heard anything since. When did you log it? Wednesday morning. You? Same. We were both quiet. Then Raymond said, Marcus, what's going on? I don't know, but I think something is paying attention to infrastructure. Paying attention how? That's what I'm trying to figure out. We agreed to keep each other informed if we saw anything else. The conversation ended there. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. The rest of my shift was quiet. I kept watching Plant 7's data streams, but everything behaved normally. At some point around 5 in the morning, I realised I was hoping for another anomaly. Just to confirm, I wasn't imagining patterns where none existed. Nothing happened. I went home feeling more unsettled than I had after the first incident. Chapter 3. The object that isn't an object. The third occurrence was different. This time I saw something, or rather, I saw the absence of something. It was early October, about 2 weeks after my conversation with Raymond. I had started arriving at work 30 minutes early and staying 30 minutes late, expanding my observation window. I told myself it was due diligence. Really, I was looking for it, whatever it was. At 2:53 in the morning, I stepped outside for air. The operations centre where I work sits on the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by warehouses and light manufacturing facilities. At night, the area is essentially deserted. A few security lights. The occasional truck passing on the frontage road. Nothing else. The sky was clear, new moon, the kind of darkness you don't get in cities. I was looking up, not for any particular reason, just appreciating the stars, when I noticed something odd about the light patterns. There's a cell tower about a quarter mile to the northeast. Red aircraft warning lights blink at the top. I've seen those lights thousands of times. I could time my coffee breaks by their rhythm, but that night the blinks were wrong. Not in timing. They still flashed at the regulation interval. But twice, maybe 3 times, the light appeared to blink behind something. Not a cloud. The sky was clear, not a bird. The interruption was too geometric, too consistent. Something was between me and that tower. Something that didn't reflect light. Something that had depth and dimension, but no visible surface. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes watching. The interruption happened again. The red light blinked, and for just a fraction of a second it was occluded. Not dimmed, not scattered, blocked. I went back inside and pulled up our site's external security camera feed. We have 4 cameras with overlapping fields of view, covering the parking area and building perimeter. I rewound to the time I'd been standing outside. The footage showed me clearly, standing there, looking up, but it showed nothing else. No object, no shadow, no anomaly in the frame. I switched to the infrared mode we use for overnight monitoring. Still nothing. But when I looked at the timestamp, metadata, something caught my attention. The camera had logged 3 brief buffering events during the time I was outside, each lasting less than a second. Not enough to disrupt recording, but enough to appear in the diagnostic log. I checked the network traffic analysis. During those buffering moments, data transmission from that camera had spiked, not by much, just enough to suggest the processor was working harder than usual to encode the video stream, as if it was trying to render something it couldn't quite process. I filed that in my personal documentation as well. Growing larger now. Screenshots, log exports, timestamps. I was building a case file without knowing what the case was. Chapter 4. The pattern. Over the next month, I documented 17 separate incidents. Not all at Plant 7. Not all involving the same type of system anomaly, but all sharing certain characteristics. They occurred between 2:30 and 3:45 in the morning. They lasted between 20 and 55 minutes. They involved measurements that were technically accurate, but contextually improbable. They resolved themselves without intervention. They left no permanent evidence in official logs. I created a spreadsheet. Date, time, duration, system affected, type of anomaly, correlation factors. I'm not a data scientist, but I know enough about pattern recognition to see what was emerging. Whatever this was, it operated on a schedule. Not a regular schedule. The incidents didn't happen every night or even every week, but when they did happen, they clustered around specific times. Tuesday and Thursday nights were most common. Weekend incidents were rare, but not unheard of. I cross-referenced this against shift schedules, maintenance logs, and operational patterns. Tuesday and Thursday nights were when we ran reduced staffing. Fewer people monitoring systems, more automation, longer gaps between human observation. It was choosing when to appear, based on when it was least likely to be noticed. But it wasn't trying to hide. If it wanted to avoid detection completely, it could have. Our systems aren't monitored with perfect vigilance. There are gaps, blind spots, times when no one is watching at all. Instead, it was operating in a margin, present enough to be detectable if someone was paying attention, quiet enough to be dismissed as instrumental error if they weren't. That suggested something I didn't want to consider. It wanted to be found, but only by someone who was looking carefully. Raymond had continued reporting his observations. Voltage anomalies, frequency drift, momentary load imbalances, always in the same time window, always resolving without cause. He told me his reports were being acknowledged, but never investigated. The responses were polite and professional. "Thank you for your diligence. We'll monitor the situation." And then nothing. I asked him if he thought we were being ignored. "No," he said. "I think we're being managed." That was somehow worse than being ignored. Chapter 5. The Missed Report. In mid-November, I decided to file an official report, not through my normal supervisory chain, but through the Infrastructure Anomaly Reporting System maintained by the State Utilities Commission. It's designed for exactly this kind of thing, unexplained system behaviour that doesn't rise to the level of emergency but warrants documentation. I spent 3 hours writing it. I included timestamps, system logs, correlation analysis, and cross-references to Raymond's electrical grid observations. I didn't speculate about causes. I just presented data. Factual, professional, verifiable. I submitted it on a Monday morning before I went to bed. By Wednesday night, when I came back on shift, I had a response. The email was cordial. It thanked me for my thoroughness. It acknowledged that I had identified some interesting correlations. It noted that periodic anomalies in automated systems are common and generally attributable to sensor drift, environmental factors, or timing coincidences in how multiple systems sample data. The report had been reviewed by appropriate technical staff. No safety issues were identified. No pattern of equipment failure was evident. The anomalies I documented fell within expected operational variance. The case was closed. No follow-up questions. No request for additional data. No interest in the correlation with electrical grid observations. Just noted, reviewed, closed. I read that email 4 times. Then I called Raymond. "Did you file a formal report?" I asked. "Last week." "You?" "Yeah, got a response today." "Let me guess. Thank you for your diligence, case closed?" "Pretty much." "Same here." He paused. "Marcus, I've been thinking about this. Maybe we're making something out of nothing. These systems are complex. Coincidences happen." "You don't believe that?" "No," he admitted. "But I don't know what I do believe. And I'm starting to think maybe that's intentional." "What do you mean?" "I mean, whoever reviewed our reports knew exactly what we were seeing. And they closed the cases anyway. Not because they think we're wrong, but because they think we're right and they don't want it investigated." I didn't sleep well that day. Chapter 6. The Near Encounter. December brought early snow. Not much, just enough to make the roads inconvenient and give me an excuse to leave for work even earlier than I'd been doing. I told myself it was about avoiding traffic. Really, I was still looking. On a Thursday night, 3 days before Christmas, I got closer than I ever wanted to. We'd had a minor equipment issue at Plant 7. A backup generator had failed its automated test cycle, which meant someone needed to physically inspect it to determine if it was a genuine fault or a sensor error. Normally, we'd wait for day shift maintenance, but the forecast called for heavy snow, overnight, and protocol required backup power systems to be verified operational before severe weather. I volunteered to drive out there. It's only 15 miles. I had the access codes. I'd done field inspections before. I left the operations centre at 2:23 in the morning. The drive was uneventful. Roads were clear. No other vehicles. The snow hadn't started yet, but I could smell it in the air. That particular metallic crispness that comes before a storm. I reached Plant 7 at 2:41. The facility was quiet. Security lights illuminated the main treatment buildings. Everything looked normal. I parked near the generator building, grabbed my inspection tablet and flashlight, and headed inside. The generator checked out fine. The sensor had failed, not the equipment. I documented it, reset the test cycle, and confirmed it passed. Total time inside, maybe 12 minutes. When I came back outside, something was wrong. Not obviously wrong, not dramatically. Wrong. Just wrong. The air felt thick, not humid, not cold, just resistant. Like moving through something slightly denser than air should be. The sound was off too. I could hear the hum of the facility equipment, but it seemed muted, distant. Like I was hearing it through a wall. I looked up. The sky was overcast now, clouds having moved in while I was inside. But the light was strange. The security lights created halos that extended farther than they should. The shadows were too sharp. Then I noticed my truck. It was exactly where I'd parked it, but it looked farther away. Not much, maybe 10 or 15 feet. Except I knew I'd parked it 30 feet from the generator building entrance. I always park in the same spot. I walked toward it. Each step felt normal. But when I reached the truck, I turned back toward the building. The distance looked right now. 30 feet, like it should be. My depth perception wasn't working correctly. I got in the truck and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:58. I had been inside for 12 minutes. It was now 34 minutes since I'd left the operations centre. That left 10 minutes unaccounted for. 10 minutes of drive time on a 15-mile route that should take 18 minutes. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Had I driven faster than I realised? Had I lost time inside the building? Was the clock wrong? Then I looked at my phone. It agreed with the truck's clock. 2:58. I checked my inspection tablet. The timestamp on my generator report showed I'd entered the building at 2:43 and completed the inspection at 2:55. That was 12 minutes, but I'd arrived at 2:41. 2 minutes were missing between when I parked and when I entered the building. I tried to remember those 2 minutes. I remembered parking. I remembered getting my equipment. I remembered walking to the door. But there was a gap, a smoothness in the memory, like a transition seen in a movie where time passes, but nothing happens. I drove back to the operations centre. The route took exactly 18 minutes. Nothing unusual happened. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I'd almost convinced myself I'd just lost track of time. Simple explanation, human error. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been somewhere else for those 2 minutes. Somewhere that wasn't quite aligned with normal space. Chapter 7. After Effects. No missing time after that. No injuries, no dramatic physical evidence. But things were different. Small things, subtle things. My sense of timing became imprecise. I've always been able to estimate elapsed time accurately. It's a useful skill for my job. But after that night at Plant 7, my internal clock was consistently off. I'd think 5 minutes had passed and it would be 7. I'd estimate 15 minutes and it would be 12. I started having trouble with spatial relationships, not dramatically. I could still drive, still function normally, but occasionally a doorway would seem narrower than I remembered, or a hallway would feel longer. The distortions were brief, momentary, but persistent. I also developed an acute awareness of being watched. Not by people, not by cameras, just watched. The feeling would come on suddenly, usually during the quiet hours at work. I'd be monitoring systems, and the back of my neck would prickle. I'd turn around, nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I mentioned this to Raymond during one of our coffee meetings. He looked uncomfortable. "Yeah," he said, "I've been feeling that too, like something's paying attention." "Since when?" "About a month, since I filed that report." We didn't talk about it much after that. What could we say? We were both rational people who worked with empirical systems. We dealt in measurements and verifiable data. Feelings of being watched didn't fit into that framework, but the feeling persisted. I also started noticing patterns in my peripheral vision, quick movements that resolved into nothing when I looked directly, shadows that didn't align with light sources, brief distortions in reflective surfaces. None of it was dramatic enough to document. None of it was clear enough to verify. It existed in that margin between perception and imagination. The most disturbing change was the dreams. I don't normally remember my dreams, but starting in January, I began having the same dream repeatedly. I was standing in the parking lot at Plant 7 looking up. The sky was full of stars, but they were wrong, moving in patterns that stars don't move, and I was aware that something enormous was overhead. Not threatening, just present, observing. In the dream, I always felt calm, curious, like I was being shown something important that I couldn't quite understand. I'd wake up with no anxiety, no fear, just a profound sense of having missed something obvious. Chapter 8. Independent Confirmation. In late February, I found the forum. I wasn't looking for it. I was researching infrastructure monitoring protocols for work and stumbled across a discussion thread on an engineering message board. The topic was about unexplained sensor anomalies in automated systems. Most of the posts were routine troubleshooting, but one thread caught my attention. Someone with the username GridWatch had posted a detailed description of voltage anomalies they'd observed over several months. The pattern was identical to what Raymond had documented. I created an account and messaged them privately. I didn't give details, just asked if they'd noticed any temporal patterns. They responded within an hour. Tuesday and Thursday nights, 2:30 to 4, you too? We ended up talking for 3 hours. GridWatch was a power systems engineer in Oregon, 600 miles from where I was. Different grid, different utility authority, but the same pattern, same time window, same unexplained resolution. Over the next week, I found 4 more people: a wastewater treatment operator in Nevada, a telecom systems analyst in Colorado, a meteorologist in Idaho who'd noticed atmospheric measurement anomalies, an air traffic controller in Montana who tracked brief radar artifacts. All of them had seen something. All of them had reported it through official channels. All of them had been told essentially the same thing. Interesting observations, no safety concern, case closed. None of them knew each other. None of them had connected their observations to anything larger. Until now. We created a private group. We started sharing data, and the pattern became undeniable. Across 5 states, over 18 months, at least 27 people had documented the same phenomenon. System anomalies that were technically valid, but contextually impossible. Always during low observation hours, always resolving without intervention, always occurring in proximity to critical infrastructure. The most chilling discovery was the geographic pattern. When we plotted the incidents on a map, they formed a rough grid, not random, not clustered in one area, distributed across the western United States in a way that suggested methodical coverage. Something was surveying infrastructure, systematically, comprehensively, and it had been doing so for at least 1.5 years, probably longer. We just hadn't noticed until we compared notes. Chapter 9. The theory that explains too much. In March, I developed a working hypothesis. I didn't share it with the group immediately. I wanted to test it against the data first. The hypothesis went like this. What we were observing wasn't visiting Earth, it wasn't arriving or departing. It was already here, had been here, would continue to be here. It existed in the margins of human observation, not hiding, not avoiding detection, simply operating in the spaces between our attention. It interacted with systems, not people. It measured, it tested, it observed, but it didn't interfere beyond what was necessary to gather data. The contact was non-invasive, almost respectful. It triggered anomalies only when they wouldn't cause harm. It resolved them before human operators needed to act. It avoided patterns that would force official acknowledgement. This suggested several disturbing possibilities. First, it understood human systems well enough to know how they were monitored. Second, it had access to operational schedules and staffing patterns. Third, it could predict when anomalies would be dismissed versus investigated. Fourth, it had been doing this long enough to refine its approach. The most unsettling implication was this. The phenomenon wasn't studying our infrastructure to understand our technology. It was studying our infrastructure to understand us, how we organize, how we coordinate, how we respond to anomalies, how we filter information, how we decide what to investigate and what to ignore. It was learning the patterns of human collective behavior by watching how we managed our shared resources. When I finally shared this hypothesis with the group, the response was mixed. Some thought I was overinterpreting. Some thought I wasn't going far enough. but no one could offer a better explanation that fit all the data. The air traffic controller, whose username was Skywatch, raised a question that stuck with me. If it's been here all along, and it's this good at staying in the margins, how many of them are there? And what happens when they're done studying? No one had an answer. Chapter 10. Why it never became a story. You'd think something like this would make headlines. 27 witnesses, documented evidence, multiple jurisdictions, a pattern spanning multiple states. But it didn't. Here's why. No single incident was dramatic. Each anomaly, taken individually, was easily explained. Sensor drift, calibration error, environmental factors, human fatigue. No evidence survived rigorous scrutiny. We had logs and timestamps and correlation analyses, but we didn't have physical proof. No photographs, no video, no material samples. Nothing that couldn't be dismissed as instrumental artifact. No authority denied it strongly enough to raise questions. Our reports were acknowledged, they were reviewed, they were filed. The response was professional, thorough, and completely non-committal. There was nothing to push against, no cover-up to expose, just polite bureaucratic processing. The story died because it was too quiet to fear. It didn't fit the narrative of how contact should happen. No invasion, no communication, no revelation. Just data that didn't quite add up in ways that most people would never notice. I tried talking to a journalist once, met them at a coffee shop, showed them the spreadsheet, the timeline, the geographic distribution. They were interested for about 10 minutes. Then they asked the question that killed it. What do you want people to do with this information? I didn't have an answer because there was nothing to do, no threat to prepare for, no action to take, no demand to make. It was just information about something that was happening, and that wasn't enough. The journalist thanked me for my time and never followed up. Our private group continued documenting incidents. We compared notes, we refined our data, but we stopped trying to convince anyone else. What was the point? We'd learned what we needed to learn. We were being studied, carefully, patiently, by something that had no interest in being known. And the world continued exactly as it had before. Epilogue. Still there. It's late April now. I'm writing this during my shift. 3:32 in the morning. The quiet hours. Plant 7 is running normally. All systems within parameters. Nothing unusual in the logs. But I'm watching, and I know it's there. Not tonight maybe, but soon, Tuesday or Thursday, between 2:30 and 4, something will drift. Some measurement will be technically correct, but contextually impossible. And I'll document it, add it to the file, send it to the group, and nothing will change. The phenomenon is still operating, still measuring, still learning. The incidents haven't stopped. They've just become part of the background, part of what infrastructure does in the hours when no one is watching. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what it's building toward. Maybe nothing. Maybe it's purely observational. Maybe we're as interesting to it as soil bacteria are to us. Present, measurable, ultimately not concerning. Or maybe it's waiting, gathering enough data to understand us completely. Learning our patterns so thoroughly that when it does make itself known, we won't even realise it's happening. The water still flows, the power still runs, the systems still hum along exactly as they're designed to, and somewhere in the margins, in the spaces between human attention, something watches. It's not hiding, it's just patient, and I suspect it's been here much longer than we think. The quiet hours are when the world runs on automation, when cities idle instead of sleep, when critical systems operate without human oversight. It's the perfect time for observation. And I think it knows we know it's there. It just doesn't care if we believe it. Because belief isn't required for observation to continue. The numbers tell their story. the patterns persist. The evidence accumulates in private files and abandoned reports. And in the quiet hours, when the world stops watching, we are being watched in return. I don't know how this ends. I don't know if it ends. I just know that whatever is out there operates on timescales we can't imagine. And what seems like an 18-month study to us might be the briefest glance to them. A moment of curiosity, a passing interest, a casual survey of infrastructure managed by creatures who still measure time in years instead of eons. We build systems to last decades. It thinks in millennia, and will never be able to prove it was here, because it leaves no evidence that can't be explained away, no proof that survives the filter of official skepticism, no story dramatic enough to overcome the human preference for comfort over truth. So it remains what it has always been, an anomaly, a curiosity, a pattern that technically shouldn't exist but can always be dismissed. And in the quiet hours I watch my screens, and I know I'm not the only one watching. The question isn't whether it's real. The question is what happens when it finishes collecting data, and whether we'll even notice when it does. My shift ends in 4 hours. The sun will rise, the day crew will arrive, systems will continue their routines, and tonight, during the hours nobody watches, it will be back, measuring, testing, observing, still there, always, there in the quiet hours where nobody looks